So, how hard should you train on each set to build muscle? I would say for the vast majority of your sets, the minimum level of effort that you should be training at is What's up guys, Sean Nalawani, RealScienceAthletics.com, and in this video today I'm going to be responding to a video by Jeff Nippard. It's either Jeff or Yef, it might be a soft J, but in any case the video is entitled, How Hard Should You Train to Build Muscle? The Truth. And in that video he interviews 5 other experts, Mike Israetel, Jon Meadows, Stefi Cohen, Eric Helms, and Greg Nuckols to get their opinion on this question.
So in this video I'm asking 5 highly qualified experts one of the most important questions in fitness. How hard should we train?
And by how hard should you train, they're specifically talking about your effort level per set, or in other words, how close to failure you should be going. And this is a really important question because getting close enough to failure on your sets is the primary stimulus that triggers the entire muscle building process. Nothing else in your training plan or your diet really has any significance at all unless you're training hard enough in the first place to actually stimulate those adaptive processes into motion. And so the effort level that you put forth in the gym is the absolute primary driver of hypertrophy that everything else is then built on top of. And I would say that on average, most people just don't train hard enough for optimal muscle gains. Now, I think the best way to measure this is by using RIR, which stands for reps in reserve. In other words, how many reps prior to muscular failure are you stopping your set? So if you took your 10 rep max, which means a weight where if there was a gun to your head and your life was literally on the line, then 10 reps is the absolute maximum number of reps that you could do in proper form with that weight. In that case, doing 9 reps with it would be 1 RIR, so 1 rep in reserve, 8 reps would be 2 RIR, 7 reps would be 3 RIR, and so on. And if you went all the way to failure and you did 10 reps, then it would be 0 RIR. So I'm just gonna go through the 5 different answers that were given, and I'm gonna highlight a few key things from each one because I think that each of them had something unique to add into the mix. And Greg Doucette also did a video response to this as well, and he gave his answer, so I'm going to include him in this as well. And then after that, I'll give you my answer to the question because in my personal opinion, there was one key piece to the answer that wasn't included. So make sure to watch this video all the way through. And if you want to check out Jeff's full video, then I'll link it in the description box. Obviously, the credit goes to him because ultimately he's the one who conducted these interviews. If you're new here, then make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all of my latest videos, and let's jump into it. So first up was Mike Israetel, and his basic position is that you need to train hard enough to stimulate muscle growth, but not so hard that your future training sessions end up being negatively impacted.
You have to train hard enough to make gains, but not so hard that your next workout suffers and it becomes a situation where your next workout is unable to make you gains because you went too hard.
And I think that's a really important point because you can't just look at things on an individual workout for workout basis. You have to think in terms of the overall picture. Sure, you can go into the gym and completely destroy yourself in one session and perform 30 sets to failure to the point where you need to be carried out of the gym on a stretcher. And yeah, you might stimulate greater net muscle growth for that one isolated session than you would if you did, say, 18 sets with 1 to 2 reps in reserve, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best approach when you extrapolate it over the longer term. If you're creating excessive muscle damage and joint stress and just overall systemic fatigue for a given workout, then either you're going to have to rest a lot longer to fully recover before you can train again at your maximum capacity, or you're going to go back into the gym before you've had a chance to properly recover, and so now that next session is going to suffer because of that. So it's about striking a good balance between training hard enough to make progress, but not so hard that you end up digging an excessive hole into your recovery each time that actually limits your long-term progress, not to mention increases your chances for injury as well. And this is also why I wouldn't advise taking advice from certain YouTubers out there who recommend that you train 6 days per week with high volume and take every single set to muscular failure and beyond. Probably not ideal for the average natural lifter out there. So next up was Jon Meadows, and the unique aspect of his advice is that he takes training experience into account.
When you start training, I think we all realize that you don't have to kill yourself. You don't need to take sets to failure. You don't need a crazy high amount of volume. Just by learning proper form, you just continue to get stronger and stronger. You make nice little incremental increases in strength.
So basically for beginners, he says, it's mostly just about making basic linear increases in the amount of weight that you're lifting, which I've talked about many times before. Okay, you don't need anything fancy as a novice. The focus should really just be on building an overall strength base on the key compound lifts, and the size will just automatically follow.
So you kind of move into an intermediate stage where it's like, okay, now I feel most of these movements pretty good. It's not as easy to get as strong now. Now I'm going to add a little bit of volume. I'm going to add a little bit of intensity. The primary goal with that phase, I think, is still trying to get a little bit stronger, though. It's just because you've kind of went out of that newbie gain phase, it doesn't mean all of a sudden now you don't care about progressing your lifts.
Then at the intermediate stage, the focus is still mainly on strength progression, but you can kind of start pushing things a bit harder at that point. And I agree with that as well. As I've said many times before as well, unless you're an advanced lifter, building muscle is mostly just about basic progressive overload in terms of weight and rep increases. You just need to focus on getting stronger in proper form, period.
You get to this advanced stage, now all of a sudden you've got to challenge your body more. So some of those techniques that we like to use, an occasional cluster set and an occasional drop set, maybe you start putting one of those in a workout, going back to our chest example. Now maybe you get on a machine and now maybe do a cluster set to finish your day, or maybe you do a drop set to finish your day, something to really challenge the muscle.
So then once you're more advanced, let's say you've put in somewhere between about 3 to 5 years of consistent proper training. At that point, if you really want to see further gains, then you really have to push the envelope. Your body is already highly adapted to resistance training at that point. It's a lot further away from its natural set point, and so you've got to give it a very strong incentive to pack on even more muscle than it already has. And so this is where you can really start challenging yourself and incorporating higher intensity techniques like going to failure more often, and things like cluster sets, rest pause, drop sets, forced reps, cheat reps, etc. After that, Jeff talks to Stefi Cohen, who basically says that if you want serious results, you cannot half-ass it. You need to be training intensely and consistently pushing yourself to your limits, and the people with the very best results are the ones who push themselves the hardest.
So from my own experience, what I've seen is that the best people in the game, like great accomplishments and great athletes, come from working obsessively. Like, you don't achieve greatness from casual effort. Never once in my entire career did I come into the gym thinking about what's the least I can do to get by.
She also thinks that most people don't train hard enough in general, which is something that I totally agree with.
People rarely train hard enough, and they're usually in what I call the 50% zone, where they don't take themselves to not failure, but to an intensity that is actually challenging. Ever, rarely, and then they don't rest when they're supposed to rest. So it's like you end up being in this 50% zone where you're always half-assing all of your workouts because you're not training hard enough when you should, and you're not resting when you should.
But she also mentions that context is important. Okay, this all assumes that you're trying to be the very best that you can be.
So if your goal is to just train for health, forget about everything I just said.
So keep that in mind too. If you just want to gain some muscle, lose some fat, and get stronger and build a decent, impressive physique, but you're not trying to do it at the very highest level, then you don't necessarily need to go all out here. Your training should reflect the specific goal that you're trying to achieve. There's nothing wrong when it all comes down to it with training at, say, 75% of your total effort in order to achieve a physique that is 75% of your total potential. It really depends on you. It depends on your goals, your life priorities, etc. Just because somebody decides to take up playing the guitar, for example, that doesn't mean that they automatically have to practice 8 hours a day and make it their goal to become an elite level guitarist. So fitness is no different, and it's up to you to decide what you ultimately want to get out of it. And by the way, if you want to grab a free step-by-step plan from me to help you get started on the path from where you are now all the way up to your ultimate goal physique, then once this video is over, make sure to visit seannall.com/custom. Just fill out the form on that page and I'll send you back a structured training, nutrition, and supplement plan that you can follow to maximize your results. You can click up here for that or use the link in the description box below. If you're enjoying this video so far, then make sure to hit that like button below and post any questions that you might have down in the comments. And then next up is Helms, who says that most of the time you should be looking at about 1 to 4 reps in reserve in order to achieve significant results, and that if you really want to grow, you need to be challenging the existing capability of the muscle.
Somewhere in the range of like a 5 to 10 RPE, depending on what your current goal is. Most of the time we're talking like 7, 8, 9 kind of thing.
He also mentions that you can do this in a variety of ways. So you can do lighter weight for higher reps, or heavier weight for lower reps, or something in between. The most important factor is just that you're getting close enough to failure on each set, which is something that I've also talked about quite a bit recently.
That can be pushing a low load set reasonably close to failure, or that can be putting 80% on the bar and doing, it could be triples if you want. If you really want to do 7x3, go for it.
Right.
But you'd probably rather do like 4x6,
Then there's also the question of leaving more reps in the tank, but performing more total sets versus going harder on each set, but then reducing the volume to compensate.
There's probably a huge continuum of what's equally effective if you do it intelligently. And that's why you can have people on the more intensity side of the spectrum or volume side of the spectrum who are winning titles, because it probably doesn't make enough of a difference to be a limit to the actual practical outcomes within a given range of that continuum.
So Eric basically says that either approach can work and can produce a similar outcome, and I would definitely agree with that, both based on my own personal experience and just looking at other people's results in the real world. There are entire schools of training on either side of the spectrum who swear by their approach and who have tons of lifters within those camps who've been very successful following either one. I've had phases in my life where I was very far on the intensity side of the spectrum doing HIIT style training, where the entire approach is to go absolutely all out to failure and beyond on every single set with advanced techniques thrown in, but then to only do a very small number of weekly sets. And I've also done phases where I was never going to failure and leaving maybe 2 reps in the tank on most sets, but then doing higher volume. And both approaches absolutely do work as long as you implement them correctly and you achieve progressive overload. I've gotten great gains, as crazy as this sounds, by literally doing a single set of 20 rep breathing squats to failure once per week for my quads. And then on the other hand, I've also gotten great gains by doing 18 sets for quads each week, but at a lower effort level per set. And then lastly is Greg Nuckols.
For pure hypertrophy training, I think your best bet is generally to be pretty close to failure. I think you should generally be within 2 or so reps of concentric failure.
So he recommends most sets being at least 2 reps short of failure, which I agree with. I think 3 RIR for most exercises is just way too easy and is not going to produce optimal results. And then after that, he goes into more guidelines for pure strength training and for volume per session, but we won't go into that here because this video is focused specifically on hypertrophy and on effort level per set as opposed to volume. And then, of course, Greg Doucette made a response to the video, and his opinion was basically that these guys are all just overcomplicating the entire thing.
IRR, deloads, reps in reserve, train a bit hard, don't train too hard, maybe take some time off, build up some reserve, don't go too hard because then you need to back up. And if you go to failure, well, it might hurt and you just don't want, and neurological failure, and more science, and so on.
In his opinion, the simple answer to the question of how hard to train is...
train harder than last time. That is the message. Stop telling people 100 different things. The first thing you tell everyone, train harder than last time.
And I think if we're talking about the average novice lifter out there in the gym and not the more advanced guys, then he does make a reasonable point. I don't think this whole question requires a super complicated answer. And I think the average person out there definitely will benefit from just being told, like, look, stop training like a little pansy, get serious, buckle down and start pushing yourself close to your limits if you want real results. Now, as far as the actual statement, train harder than last time goes,
harder than friggin' last time.
I think that's good advice in the overall sense. Okay, you do need to train harder than last time if you want to see consistent muscle building results, but that statement is much more applicable in the sense of progressive overload as opposed to effort level per set or RIR/RPE, which is really what Jeff's video was about. Yes, you absolutely do need to train harder than last time by increasing the workload in some way, whether it's lifting a slightly heavier weight or performing more reps with the same weight, or by using some other method of progressive overload, but you don't need to constantly train harder than last time in the sense of proximity to failure on each set. You can't just linearly increase your level of effort on each set. If you did that, then by the time you've been training for 6 months, you'd be going to failure on every single set and doing forced reps, rest, pause, and drop sets after every single one. Yes, as you become more advanced over time, then you probably will need to gradually shift your effort level per set upward in the overall picture, but that shouldn't be the goal every time you go into the gym. So train harder than last time is a good motto as long as it means training harder in the sense of overall workload and not necessarily RPE or RIR, since it's not necessary or even possible to just continually increase your proximity to failure with every workout. And while it might be true that some people do overcomplicate this question of how hard to train, just saying train harder than last time, that's way too vague for most people who actually take their training seriously and who want to follow a systematized approach in order to maximize their results. I think the ideal answer for most people probably lies somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. And now, like I mentioned at the start, I also want to give my own answer to this question, and I'll try to keep this only as complicated as it needs to be. So, how hard should you train on each set to build muscle? I would say for the vast majority of your sets, the minimum level of effort that you should be training at is 2 reps in reserve. Yes, you can still get a training effect from 3 reps or even 4 reps in reserve, maybe even 5. But ultimately, 3 to 5 RIR is a pretty damn easy way to train. And if you want real results, if you want to build significant muscle, your workouts just can't be that easy. So I wouldn't be leaving any more than 2 reps in the tank on most sets. And keep in mind that that's a true 2 reps in the tank, meaning gun to your head, you could only perform 2 more reps in proper form. So that's the minimum level. And then I think the ideal sweet spot for hypertrophy is 1 to 2 reps in reserve. That's where the bulk of your sets should be centered. And then once in a while going all the way to concentric muscular failure. And as you become more advanced over time, the proportion of sets that you perform at the higher end of that effort level, that will need to increase. I agree that most people don't train hard enough, and I think a lot of people are just too caught up in the theory of things, and they just need to get under the bar, grit their teeth, and friggin' lift. If you're not making this face on at least some of your sets, if you don't feel a bit nervous before at least some of your exercises, if you don't have moments during some sets where you question why you're even doing this to yourself, then assuming that you want to maximize muscle growth, you probably need to push yourself harder. So that's the practical answer. How hard should you train? About 1 to 2 RIR on most sets, 0 RIR on some sets here and there, with the overall effort level increasing as you become more advanced. But we also have to keep in mind that most novice lifters out there aren't going to know exactly where they are in relation to failure in the first place, since that does take time to learn, and on some exercises it can be harder to gauge. So an even more basic answer would be to go close to your maximum capacity, not all the way to complete failure, stop just a little bit shy of that point. And then lastly, the other very important part of the answer, the one that I didn't see anybody give in this particular video, okay, all the specifics aside, reps in reserve, rating of perceived exertion, mesocycle intensity, volume, continuum, undulating wave, deload, blah, 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 etc. Okay, once you're actually implementing all of this, how do you actually know that you're in the right zone and that you are in fact training hard enough? And the answer is that you gauge that through your improvements in training performance. For the most part, size and strength are directly correlated. A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. And so if you're consistently coming back to the gym stronger than you were last time, so you can either lift slightly more weight on a given exercise, or you can perform an extra rep or 2 with the same weight, that is how you know that you trained hard enough in the previous session. The reason why you're stronger now is because the effort that you exerted in that previous session was sufficient to trigger new muscle building adaptations. The muscle grew, and now you are stronger because of that. So all the specific guidelines aside in terms of how hard you should train, the bottom line is that if you're consistently getting measurably stronger over time, then you are on the right track. That is how you know that you are in fact training hard enough, because if you weren't training hard enough, then you wouldn't be getting stronger. The adaptations wouldn't be getting triggered, and so you would just stay in the same place. Now, we can talk about optimization. Even though you're getting stronger and making some progress, maybe you could be making even faster progress. But again, this is just meant as a general overarching answer. Progressive overload is the underlying driver of muscle growth. And so if over time you're achieving progressive overload, your training performance is consistently getting better and better, then by definition, you are training hard enough. And this is also why it's so important for you to track your workouts on paper so that you can directly see if your training performance is improving over time. So that's my hopefully relatively simple answer. Train at 1 to 2 reps in reserve on most sets, 0 reps in reserve on some sets. As you become more advanced, you probably need to push yourself harder if you want to make new gains. And if you're consistently getting stronger, then that's how you know that you are in fact training hard enough. So thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video and you want to support the channel while adding into your program what I genuinely believe are the best formulated fitness supplements available when it comes to a pre-workout multivitamin and fish oil, then make sure to visit realscienceathletics.com. This is my own sports nutrition line that I created from scratch to fully optimize your muscle building and your fat burning results without all the regular hype and BS that's so common in the industry nowadays. We've been getting tons of positive feedback from you guys on these supplements, and I really do appreciate all the support. And you can use coupon code YouTube15 to save 15% off your entire first order. You can follow me over on Instagram for more updates. Leave a comment down below letting me know what you want to see next, and I will see you guys in a few days in the next video. Talk to you again soon.